pain. It was not a word. It was not a gesture. It was the simple presence. She walked through the entrance hall serenely, her feet firmly on the marble floor she had helped pay for. He dressed comfortably, cotton pants, plain blouse, braids tied in a low bun, no jump, no makeup, no business card, only her. But for that receptionist, that was enough to press the alarm button. Silence. The button made no noise. It only alerted the security guard on the lower floor that something out of the standard had entered. In less than 30 seconds, 2 men approached. One was in the rear. The other crossed his arms in front of him, as if blocking an imaginary door. No one asked his name. No one asked for a document. The scene was already written. A black woman, without the visual marks of power, could not be there by right. Looks. She felt the receptionist's eyes like fine needles. They were not surprising. They were judgmental. They were from someone who learned that bodies like hers are always suspect. In that employee's mind, she couldn't be a customer. He could not be a visitor. And it definitely couldn't be someone important. She was just another poor and poorly dressed black woman who knows, came in to ask for information. Or worse, shame. When they asked her to leave, they used measured words. You cannot remain in this sector without accompaniment. But the tone gave it all away. It was an expulsion disguised as protocol, a violence that tried to dress as a rule. She remained still, in silence, while the security guards looked at each other, as if waiting for resistance. But there would be no resistance. Still, wound. Inside, she was bleeding, not for that isolated moment, but for everything he represented, for all the times she had to prove that she was good, for each door he pushed, knowing that on the other side someone was already waiting to doubt, for every look that said, "You don't belong here." That bench was hers, but no one there imagined that. Memory. She recalled the day she signed the merger contract that made that bank part of the group she commanded. She recalled the sleepless night reviewing clauses, the meetings with investors, the message she received from the president of the banking federation. "Congratulations, doctor. You went down in history." But at that moment, it was just another black woman being escorted out. Silence that screams. She didn't beg. He did not explain. He just looked around. And in that look, there were centuries of injustice, but also a trace of something that no one there could decipher. A kind of force that scares more than screaming. A type of power that has not yet been recognized, but that was about to transform everything. And then, she walked through the automatic door as if crossing an invisible boundary between who is seen and who is read as a threat. They still didn't know who she was, but that was about to change. Because that woman had a name, it had history, and he had something stronger than any badge, awareness of his own worth. But what she saw in the hall, seconds before leaving, turned pain into a decision and started the turnaround. Outside, the wind seemed colder than it really was. Not because of the temperature, but because of what it carried. The indifference of a system that still insists on pushing some to the margins, even as they built the center. She sat on the concrete bench on the sidewalk, where so many wait for interviews, for answers, for some chance. But she didn't expect it. She just watched, in silence, the building where her name had been erased by the haste of prejudice. Inside, the hall was in order. People passed in a hurry, badges hanging, steps decisive, eyes that averted. Everything worked as if nothing had happened, and maybe, for them, it really didn't. Because when exclusion is repeated so many times, it is no longer seen as violence and starts to be confused with routine. That reception was more than a physical space. It was a social portrait. The photos on the walls showed leaders in ties, all white. The institutional videos talked about innovation, security, and growth, but her image, the real owner, was never there. Her name only appeared in the contracts, in the economic headlines, behind the scenes, on paper, but never in the face of the campaigns, never in the meeting room when the agenda was marketing, never when deciding who represents the company. She knew that, and he accepted, not out of resignation, but out of strategy. She knew that she still lived in a time where the black presence is only tolerated when she is silent, discreet and grateful, and even so, it still runs risks. That was why she rarely visited the branches without warning, not out of fear, but because I know the price of the exhibition. There, in that mirrored building, everything was language. The expensive clothes, the metal watches, the neutral tones on the walls, and even without saying a word, the whole room had already spoken to her, with contempt, because for that place, dignity has designer clothes and luxury items, it has a timbre of voice, it has a European surname, and it was a visual heresy on that altar of appearances. It was then that something made her get up. It wasn't anger, it was lucidity, the kind of lucidity that is only born when pain overcomes shame. She looked at the reception screen, visible even from the sidewalk. In the upper right corner, the bank's logo rotated in 3D. In the center, in white letters on a blue background, "Diversity is our greatest asset." The phrase that she herself had approved days before. The sentence that now seemed to be spit on his own skin. Across the street, a bus stopped at the light. A black man, in a shabby suit, read a contract with his eyes narrowed, trying to understand a clause. A woman carried her son's backpack while talking on her cell phone about an interview. She looked at them tenderly. She knew that the humiliation she had suffered was not only hers, it was part of a cycle, of an invisible social code that teaches everyone pretending you didn't see is safer. But there, in front of that lying screen, something moved in her. It was not revenge. It was an ancestral urgency, the need to break the cycle, to say, even without words, that it was no longer acceptable, that the time of functional silence was ending. But before she could act, she heard a voice behind her, and that voice carried more than words. It carried a reflection that she did not expect. The voice she heard was young, hesitant, loaded with an acknowledgement that she tried to disguise. An intern, black, with a badge turned upside down and restless eyes. He knew her. He knew who she was. I had attended a lecture by her less than 3 months ago, at the leadership event that the company promoted. I knew what she was capable of, what she represented, but he hesitated. She looked at him as if extending her hand without asking for anything. There was no charge, only presence, but his silence spoke too loudly, and he, with an embarrassed face, pretended to answer the phone. He pretended he didn't see it. He pretended he didn't know, because inside, defending someone like her was almost the same as saying goodbye. She understood. He understood why he had already been in that place of fear years ago. I knew the weight of having to choose between conscience and salary, between truth and survival. She just nodded, as if forgiving without words, but something inside her broke. Still, he returned. He took a deep breath and entered the building again. The security guards, disconcerted, asked her to wait. She asked to speak to someone from the board. The receptionist sighed deeply, rolled her eyes and said, "The board does not attend personally. If you want to leave a message, we can forward it." That's when a manager approached, her voice too sweet for the poison she was carrying. "Madam, our security team acted according to protocol. We have many customers here. We need to preserve everyone's integrity." Those words came with a tense smile, the kind of smile that masks the certainty of impunity. She tried to explain but was interrupted. "We understand the discomfort, but we need to follow our procedures. If you do not identify yourself, we cannot allow you to stay." She reached for her badge in her purse, but something about her hesitated. Showing who he was at that moment would be like offering the trophy before the battle. "I didn't want to taste anything. I just wanted to see how far that staging would go." She put the badge back and just said, "Thank you." I already understood everything I needed. He left slowly, as someone who carries the weight of all the times he tried to belong. And it failed. But what no one knew was that she was never there to fit in. He was there to remind everyone that the system still chooses their favorite faces and discards the rest as statistics. And in that moment, between the tinkling of revolving doors and the hurried pace of employees looking away, she knew it wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who would be rejected and judged after her. All those who would not have the privilege of returning with a legal army. All those that would be erased without a trace. But at the top of the stairs, before crossing the definitive exit, she saw something projected on the screen, something that carried her signature. And at that moment, she decided that she would not leave uninvisible. She stopped, right there, halfway between humiliation and exit. At the top of the glass wall that separated the hall from the auditorium, the screen displayed static images of recent campaigns. One showed a smiling black woman sitting in front of a meeting table. The caption read, "We build the future with those who built their own history." That image was a staging. That woman was an actress. But the phrase was hers. She remembered the day they wrote that together, she and the marketing director. It was in the mirrored room on the 19th floor, with strong coffee and complicit silence. I remembered the pause before the comma. I remembered the emotion of seeing a sentence of hers being accepted without cuts. But there, on that cold morning, the sentence seemed to spit on his absence. It was like being quoted in a book, without anyone knowing that the book was his. It was then that he felt his cell phone vibrate. A message from the legal advisor. We need you at the branch contract review meeting. We are here in the building. Which floor are you on? She stared at the viewfinder for a few seconds, as if time needed to stop to respect that moment, as if fate had waited for the right signal to turn. She did not answer. He just put his cell phone in his pocket and took a deep breath. He returned to the reception desk with slow steps. The receptionist saw her arrive and stepped forward, as if fearing a complaint, but this time she didn't say anything. He just smiled. A small, enigmatic smile, the kind of smile that precedes the hurricane. At that time, the manager came down in a hurry, warned by someone. He came with his hands flat, as if trying to prevent a storm. Madam, as we said, everything was just a protocol. Security here is strict, you know. Difficult times. But she just looked, not angry, with memory, with the awareness that he was facing someone who would never learn unless something real happened. She asked for a room, a space to wait for your team. The manager hesitated, but led. With each step down the corridor, employees looked away, some out of shame, others for fear of being associated with that uncomfortable presence. She walked as if returning to the field where she was wounded, not to relive the pain, but to rewrite history in the right way. When he entered the meeting room, he asked them to turn on the projector. He took control with the naturalness of someone who knows every inch of that place. Because I knew. She had participated in the architectural project. He had chosen the colors of the chairs, the curvature of the table. But on that day, all that was just scenery. The real stage would soon be set. She sat alone at the bedside. He didn't take off his coat. He didn't touch his hair. He just waited. Because she knew that when the truth moves, she doesn't need to scream. It just arrives. And when it arrives, there is no silence that holds it back. What no one there knew was that every second of that morning was already being recorded, and that the truth, at last, had a camera, sound, and a scheduled time to reveal itself. In the living room, light was filtered through half-open blinds. The muffled sound of the corridor kept company with the hands of the clock, which advanced like witnesses. She didn't move. He just kept his eyes fixed on the blue screen of the projector, waiting for the rest to arrive. No phone call, no order, no warning, just presence. And presence, when you are aware, is power. Outside, the buzz increased. Some said that a demanding customer was threatening to sue the bank. Others thought it was a Federation inspector. But no one dared to tell the simplest truth. This woman was too important to ignore. And there was something in the air that warned that the roles were about to be reversed. That's when she asked to see the security camera footage. He did not raise his voice. He only indicated the corner of the room with a subtle gesture. The manager hesitated, not understanding. Images? What images, ma'am? She then stood up. He opened his own purse. He removed a black badge with gold letters. He delivered as someone returning an old debt. There was written, Executive Director of Operations and Expansion, Group A. The manager, now pale, took 2 steps back. He did not apologize. He couldn't. Words, no matter how trained, didn't know what to say in front of someone who had always been there and was never seen. The images were opened. The security guard brought the tablet hesitantly. They played it. The scene was repeated in front of everyone. The entrance, the button pressed, the looks, the gestures, the escort to the door. Everything was there, in silence, but the kind of silence that teaches more than speech. She did not comment. He just pointed to the screen. It's all here. And then he looked at the manager. And how many times has this happened without registration? The question hung in the air like mist. He did not demand a response, because the answer was already implicit in all the bodies that were silenced without a camera, without a badge, without a return. What she revealed there was not her position. It was his domain, your lucidity, its ability to move structures without kicking up dust. True power never screams. He observes, waits, acts. And at that moment, she was no longer just the executive. It was the moral mirror of an institution that needed to see itself, from the inside, the intern, who until then had remained on the sidelines, watched from afar. His eyes said it all. For the first time, he saw someone like him sit in that chair without asking permission. For the first time, he identified himself with someone there. He saw courage dressed in calm. And there, between fears and silences, something new began to be born in him as well. The idea that it is possible to resist without getting lost. But what would come next was not in any manual, in any spreadsheet, because when she got up from her chair, she brought with her a presence that no one in that room would ever forget. She got up from her chair with the firmness of someone who didn't need to prove anything else. He looked around, and in that turn of eyes there was no arrogance. There was root, a root that crosses concrete, that survives pruning, that resists the cement of corporate corridors, where only what looks like what has already been planted grows. It was at that moment that the door to the room opened. 3 people entered: the crisis advisor, the director of institutional image, and one of the group's lawyers, all white, all serious, all aware that they were facing something bigger than a meeting. They didn't look at the manager, nor for the security guards. They only addressed her with a discreet nod. "Doctor, we are at your disposal." The silence that formed there was not uncomfortable. It was pedagogical. It showed, without the need for a caption, who was in control. The manager swallowed. The intern, on the other side of the glass, stood up without realizing it, and one of the receptionists lowered her gaze as if trying to erase what she saw. She did not make a speech. He did not demand an audience. He only asked them to open the company's inclusion report, the one it had signed in the last quarterly review. They leafed through together, and there was his name, his face, his signature, his proposal for affirmative action, all official, everything recorded. Everything was denied in practice minutes before. It was then that she did something that no one expected. She smiled, a bitter smile, restrained, but full of presence. You have protocols to protect the money, but they still don't know how to protect humanity. The phrase fell like a stone on the glass table. It didn't break anything, but it cracked everything inside. The lawyer cleared his throat, preparing the ground for a conciliatory speech, but she interrupted him gently. "I don't want a public apology. I want private changes, the ones that happen when no one is looking, because that's where racism lives." The intern, now visibly shaken, knocked on the door. He excused himself. He said, in a trembling voice, that he needed to speak. He looked at her with the teary eyes of someone who carries guilt for having been silent. "I'm sorry. I knew who you were, and even so, I hid." She just nodded. It was not forgiveness that he was asking for. It was a mirror. She walked over, lightly touched his shoulder, and said, "You didn't hide. You survived." And in that touch, she gave him a strength that did not come from hierarchical position, but from ancestry. Because for centuries, women like her have held the whole world with one hand and still extend the other. But what did he do after that meeting? Surprised even her, and marked the beginning of something that no protocol could predict. But what did he do after that meeting? Surprised even her, and marked the beginning of something that no protocol could predict. That same afternoon, the intern went up the 7 floors to the human resources sector. He didn't ask for anything urgent. He didn't raise his voice. He just waited to be attended, and, with the same fear that paralyzed him earlier, he said, "I would like to request a speaking space in the next integration of new employees." The HR analyst looked up, surprised. "Speech space?" He nodded. "I need to tell you something." The following week, the building's smaller auditorium was prepared for the reception of new hires. Chairs lined up, modest coffee breaks, handouts on organizational culture. In the middle of the program, they included his speech as a motivational testimony. But what he delivered there was much more than motivation. It was a mirror. He stood up in front of 30 people and said, "A week ago, I saw a black woman kicked out of the front desk. I knew who she was. I knew I was one of the company's leaders, but I pretended not to know. I pretended not to see. I hid. And today, I'm here because I don't want to pretend anymore." The silence that followed was profound, a tight throat silence, eyes that avoid, of truths that no one knew where to put it. And then he concluded, "The worst cowardice I committed was to be silent in the face of courage, but this will no longer be repeated, because now I know. Dignity is not a favor. It's the bare minimum." After the speech, no one applauded immediately. It was as if everyone needed to breathe. The HR manager wrote something down in her notebook. One of the white interns quietly asked to learn more about internal racial equity groups. And the following week, the diversity coordination proposed a reformulation of the reception training. They began by asking, "What do you see when someone walks in the door?" A simple question, but one that changes everything. At the group's headquarters, the CEO learned of what happened by message. He read it in silence. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that something had shifted, not in position or power, but in collective consciousness. The video from the security camera, previously restricted, was added to the company's ethics module, not as an example of error, but as a mark of change. The caption on the material read, "What started as silence has become a symbol, and symbols have strength." But the final gesture, the one that would close the cycle without a single word, it was yet to happen, and no one imagined the impact it would have. She returned to the building on a Friday morning. The same hall, the same steps, the same air conditioning that always seemed colder when she entered. But something had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. The doorman's gaze was different, not out of fear, but be careful, of care, as someone who understands, finally, who is in front of him. This time, there was no uncomfortable reception, nor does he silence the security guard. She passed by with the badge visible, but it was not he who opened the way. It was the recent memory of what everyone had learned. The seat was still the same on the outside, but inside, something was no longer as sustainable as before. On the 14th floor, the boardroom was quiet, meeting scheduled with the presidency to deliver the new conduct reports. She brought them with her. 3 portfolios, 3 names, 3 stories that crossed hers that day. The receptionist, the manager, the security guard. He read each passage in a low and firm voice. He did not omit it, but he didn't expose it either. He just presented, as if returning what he received. He ended by saying, "These people did not make mistakes alone. They repeated what they learned, but now they know. And who knows, you may no longer act as if you don't know." There was a possibility of permanence there, but also one condition, real change. 2 of them would be relocated. The manager, exonerated from the leadership position. The decision did not come as a punishment. It came as a consequence. Because respect is not implanted, it is built. And she could no longer allow the same ground to be trodden with the same shoes soiled with neglect. Before leaving the room, she asked for a symbolic change. The photo of the new inclusion campaign would be updated, and, for the first time, not with models, but with real faces. She didn't want to show up, but he suggested, "Put the intern in. It represents the future that we still have a chance to build." On the way out, he crossed paths with him again. He carried a stack of reports and his shirt folded in his sleeves. When he saw her, he stopped. He said nothing. He just took the badge off his neck, straightened himself, and walked again. It was the simplest gesture in the world, but for her, it was like a rite of passage, a silent confirmation that something, in fact, had changed. And as she went down the floors towards the street, there was no hurry, nor wait, only the certainty that, sometimes, returning to the place of pain is the only way to prove that the wound has become a scar, and that the scar has become a path. But there was one last gesture reserved, a small gesture without witnesses, and that still echoes on the walls of that place today. She left through the side door, the same one that had been denied to so many. He walked to the small garden behind the building. It was a discreet place, almost forgotten, where rarely did anyone go, but she knew that was where she would need to leave something. Not to be seen, but to stay. In his bag, he had a simple envelope, recycled paper, without letterhead. Inside, there was a single leaf, a memorandum. In it, the complete review of the safety protocol for all units of the group, based on what happened to her, written by her, validated by all. In the last line, a handwritten phrase, "To respect is to recognize without asking for it." He placed the envelope inside a wall-mounted metal box used for internal mail. He closed with delicacy, and then he pulled out of his pocket a small golden pin, an open circle, a symbol used in the company's diversity committee meetings. That pin had been given to her in her first year of leadership, when she was still viewed with suspicion. He bent down and fixed the brooch discreetly at the base of a tree in the garden, an almost invisible gesture. No photo, no registration, but full of presence, as if to say, "I'm here, I was here, and nothing will erase that. From afar, the intern watched. He didn't get closer. He knew that at that moment he did not ask for witnesses. He asked for silence. And in silence, he understood that some fights do not need an audience to be victorious. They just need continuity. Then she walked through the streets of the center with quiet steps. In the window of a clothing store, he saw his reflection. He looked at himself without reviewing his posture, without adjusting his gaze. She was whole, and that was enough. The story did not appear in the newspapers. Nobody wrote articles about it. But something echoed, in elevator conversations, in future meetings, in eyes that, by crossing other black eyes, learned not to swerve. And every time someone new came into that branch and asked about the garden, they said, "That's where the point of silence is." No one explained, but those who sat there for a few minutes always came out different, as if he had heard something, or feeling someone, as if he were, in some way, closely following the history of that day. Because justice, many times, is not noise, it is permanence. Because dignity is sometimes not said, she is remembered. And because true, it never disappears. She just waits for the right moment to be revealed. And to this day, anyone who passes by that garden, if you pay attention to the ground, very close to the root, maybe you'll still find the brooch, and with it, the reminder that every denied history still carries within it the power to be reborn. If this story has touched you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every video here is made so that our voices are no longer ignored. Leave your like so that the algorithm understands what is really important. Comment on what this story awakened in you, and share it with someone who needs to remember their value. Here, every click is a gesture of resistance. Each story, a mirror, and each one of us, a living proof that representativeness is urgency, not a trend.